The Devil's Throne. A High School DxD fanfiction. Act 1 The Price of Trust. Chapter 1 The night they broke him. The rain had been falling since sundown. Issei Hyoudou stood at the edge of the Gremery Peerage training ground, his arms hanging at his sides, his knuckles scraped raw from 3 consecutive hours of combat drills. Steam rose from his back in thin white ribbons. The red scales of his scale mail had retracted, leaving him in his plain school uniform, which was soaked through and clinging to his skin like a second layer of regret. He had gotten stronger. He knew that. Every devil in Ko Academy knew that. The boy who had once struggled to survive a single ranked match now carried a reputation that made mid-class devils hesitate before accepting challenges against the Gremery Peerage. His boosted gear had grown from a desperate survival tool into something approaching a genuine weapon. Drake, the Welsh dragon sealed inside the sacred gear on his left hand, had called his growth unprecedented twice in the last month. Twice. From a dragon who rarely offered praise for anything less than a mountain cracking. None of that mattered tonight. He had overheard the conversation by accident. He had not been eavesdropping. He had simply returned early from the errand Rias had sent him on, had come back through the old storage corridor behind the club room because the rain had driven him toward the nearest covered path, and had stopped at the sound of his own name spoken in a tone he had never heard from people he considered family. "He is a tool," Akino had said. Her voice was flat, clinical, stripped of the warmth she wore around him like a performance. An extraordinarily powerful tool, but a tool nonetheless. Bucho uses him because the sacred gear amplifies the entire peerage. His attachment to all of us makes him easier to direct. He actually thinks he belongs here, Kaneko had replied. No sarcasm. No fondness. Just a statement of fact delivered with the mild pity one might extend to a stray dog that had wandered into the wrong territory. He is useful, Rias said, and that single word, useful, landed in Issei's chest like something with weight and edges. His feelings for me keep him motivated. I have never encouraged him dishonestly. I have simply not corrected his misunderstanding. There is a difference. Is there? Asia's voice. Small. Uncertain. Asia, Rias said gently but firmly, you are fond of him. I understand. But you were brought here for your healing abilities and your rare sacred gear. Issei was brought here for his boosted gear. We are a peerage, not a family. The distinction matters when decisions need to be made. He would die for any of us, Asia said. Yes, Akino agreed. That is what makes him ideal. Issei had stood in that dark corridor for a very long time after the voices moved away. He stood there until the rain stopped. Until the training ground lights went off automatically. Until the whole building was quiet and the only sound was water draining from the roof gutters in slow, rhythmic drops. He did not cry. He had expected that he would, had braced for it, but nothing came. What came instead was something much quieter and much colder. It settled into him like a stone dropping into deep water, and it kept sinking long after the splash was gone. He thought about every training session where Rias had praised him. He sifted through each memory with new hands, turning each one over, looking at its underside. Her patience with his slow progress. Her willingness to explain devil customs. The way she sometimes touched his shoulder when he did something right. He had read all of it as affection. As belonging. He thought about Akino's laughter. The way she called him Issei-kun and made him feel like a name could be a small warm thing. He thought about Kaneko bringing him food once, without being asked, when he had missed dinner because of a long training session. He turned each memory over. On the back of every one, he found the word useful, stamped there in Rias Gremery's handwriting. Drake said nothing for a long time. Then the dragon spoke quietly inside the sacred gear, his ancient voice low and careful. Partner. What do you want to do? Issei looked down at the gauntlet on his left hand. The red gem pulsed once, slow as a heartbeat. I want to stop being useful to someone else, he said. I want to start being something on my own. Drake was quiet for another long moment. Then we begin, the dragon said. Issei walked out of the training ground into the wet night. He did not look back. Chapter 2 What the Dragon Remembers. He did not go to school the next day. He sent no messages. He ignored 3 calls from Rias and 1 from Asia, which was harder. He sat on the roof of his house in the early morning light with a cup of cold tea he had forgotten to drink, and he took stock. He was a low-class devil reincarnated from a human, currently serving as a pawn in the Gremry peerage. He held the boosted gear, one of the 13 Longinus, a sacred gear so powerful that the devil world had built entire strategic assessments around what it might become. He was 17 years old. He had no independent political standing, no territory, no titles, and no allies who were not currently affiliated with Rias Gremry. He was, in the language of the devil world, property. The thought did not make him angry. He had moved past the anger sometime in the second hour of standing in that corridor. What he felt now was something closer to clarity, the way a room looks after all the furniture has been moved out, bare and unobstructed and full of possibility. "Drake," he said quietly. "I am here," the dragon answered immediately. He had been awake all night. Issei suspected Drake had not slept since the corridor. "Tell me about the boosted gear. Everything you have never told me because you thought I was not ready." A pause. Then a sound that might have been the dragon equivalent of a long exhale. "That conversation will take a while. I have time." What Drake told him over the next 4 hours reshaped everything Issei thought he understood about his own power. The boosted gear, Drake explained, was not simply a doubling device. The doubling was a safeguard, a limiter built into the sacred gear's earliest form to prevent a human host from destroying himself with unchecked acceleration. The true core of the boosted gear was something older and far more fundamental. It was a gear of absolute potential. It did not amplify power. It amplified the ceiling of power. There was a difference, and that difference was enormous. Every living being had a limit, a point beyond which growth simply stopped. Flesh, soul, and sacred gear all had hard ceilings built into their fundamental nature. The boosted gear, wielded fully and with complete understanding, could move those ceilings. Not just in Issei, but in anyone he chose to share his power with. Collectively. Persistently. The Juggernaut Drive was one expression of this. Balance Breaker was another. But Drake had spent the last 1,000 years watching his wielders stop at those thresholds because no one had ever thought to push further. "Why did you never tell any of the others?" Issei asked. "Because they were all racing toward power as an end," Drake said. "You are the first one who ever seemed to want power as a means. That distinction matters for what I am about to explain. The deeper function of the boosted gear, the thing Drake called the sovereign's amplification, required the wielder to have a genuine investment in the people he empowered. Not obligation. Not strategy. Genuine care. The dragon had built the original limitation partly because he had watched wielder after wielder use shared boost as a manipulation tool, had watched it corrupt them, and had decided that the deeper function would only unlock for someone whose motivation was real. "So when Rias used my feelings to make me easier to direct," Issei said carefully, "she was actually preventing me from ever accessing the part of my power that requires genuine relationships." "Yes," Drake said. "The irony is complete." Issei set down the cold tea. He looked at the boosted gear. "If I build real relationships, on my own terms, with people who actually want to be around me and not around what I can do for them, the sovereign's amplification will awaken naturally," Drake confirmed. "And it will be permanent. Not a temporary boost. A permanent elevation of everyone bound to you. That is the most dangerous power in the devil world," Issei said slowly. "It is the most dangerous power in any world," Drake agreed. "Which is why no one has ever had it. And why I need you to understand something before you take a single step toward building it. Tell me. Every faction will try to claim you or destroy you the moment they realize what you are becoming. The devils, the angels, the fallen, the old satans, the gods who watch from the edges. All of them. You will not survive by becoming stronger than them. You will survive by becoming something they cannot categorize. Something that does not fit their existing frameworks for how power works." Issei thought about that for a long time. "You are telling me not to become a weapon," he said. "You are telling me to become a force." "I am telling you," Drake said, "to become a devil? Not in the way Rias defines that word. In the oldest way. An entity of absolute will that bends the world toward its own vision, not through violence alone, but through the weight of what it chooses to be." The morning sun had fully risen by the time Drake finished speaking. Issei stood, stretched muscles that ached from a night of no sleep, and made his first real decision as a free agent in the supernatural world. He needed allies. Not servants. Not tools. People who would choose him the same way he chose them. He needed to find them before Rias realized he was gone. Chapter 3: The Stray. He found Raynare on the third day. This required some explanation, because Raynare was dead. Or she had been dead. The fallen angel who had killed him on the night that started everything, who had stolen Asia's sacred gear and left the girl to die, who had been obliterated by Rias Gremory's power of destruction as punishment for her crimes, should not have been present in a small shrine garden on the eastern edge of Ko Town. Sitting cross-legged in the grass with her dark wings folded tightly against her back and an expression on her face that could only be described as profound exhaustion. "You are dead," Issei said, because it seemed important to establish the facts. Technically, Raynare agreed, without looking up. "I was reconstructed. My superior decided my data was worth recovering after the Gremory girl destroyed me. It took 7 months and significant resources, and when it was done I was told I had a debt to repay and a new assignment. What happened to the assignment? I declined it." Issei sat down on the shrine steps. Raynare finally looked at him, her red eyes moving over his face with the same sharp assessment she had worn the night she killed him, except that now there was something beneath the assessment that looked almost like uncertainty. "You should not be here without your peerage," she said. "I am not with my peerage anymore." A long silence. A crow called somewhere in the tree above them. "The Gremory girl let you go?" Raynare asked, and the skepticism in her voice was entirely reasonable. "She does not know yet," Issei said. "I have been avoiding the conversation. That will not last much longer. She will send someone." "I know. I need a few more days." "For what?" He looked at her directly. She met his gaze without flinching, which he had expected. Raynare was not someone who flinched. It was one of the things about her that had never changed regardless of the role she was playing, the seductive human disguise named Yuma Amano, the cold operative in Grigori's service, the weary stray sitting in a garden. "I know what you did to Asia," he said. "I am not going to pretend that is nothing or that I have forgotten it. I have not. I probably will not for a very long time." "Then why are you here?" "Because I need people who have actual reasons to be loyal to me and not to any faction," he said. "Because you declined your new assignment, which means you are either hiding here until Grigori decides to clean up the loose end or you are genuinely trying to choose something different, and I want to know which one it is." Raynare studied him for a long, careful moment. "You are the wielder of the boosted gear," she said finally. "You are one of the most watched individuals in the supernatural world. You are 17 years old and you have recently left your peerage, which means every faction with an interest in your sacred gear is about to receive a very interesting intelligence report." She paused. "And you are asking a reconstructed fallen angel whether she wants to join whatever it is you are building?" "Yes. You are either very brave or very foolish," she said. "My dragon tells me those are usually the same thing." Raynare made a sound that was not quite a laugh but was pointed in that direction. "What would you want from me?" "Intelligence. Grigori knowledge. Operational experience. And someone who knows how the supernatural world actually works as opposed to how the Gremory peerage told me it works. And in return, protection. Real protection, not the kind that comes with a leash attached. A place to exist without being someone else's asset or someone else's problem." She was quiet for a long time. The crow in the tree above them shifted its feet on the branch. "I killed you," she said, and it came out differently than anything else she had said. Not a statement of fact. Something that cost her something to say. "You did," Issei agreed. "And Rias Gremory brought me back as a chess piece. We have both been used." He looked at her steadily. "That does not mean we have to keep letting ourselves be used." Raynare looked away. She looked at the shrine gate. She looked at the tree with the crow in it. She looked at her own hands, slender and dark-nailed, resting on her knees. "I will not apologize for what I did," she said. "I will not pretend to be something soft to make you more comfortable with my presence." "I am not asking you to," Issei said. "I want you as you actually are. Not a version of you that has been sanded down to be easier to manage. She looked at him again. Something in her expression shifted, not dramatically, not the kind of shift that announces itself, but the kind that happens in the eyes when a person recalculates something important. 1 week, she said. I will watch what you do for 1 week. If what you are building is real, we discuss further. That is fair, Issei said. He stood, and she stood with him, and neither of them said anything else because there was nothing else that needed to be said yet. They walked in different directions out of the shrine garden, and if anyone had been watching from a distance they would have seen two people who had both recently decided that the next chapter of their existence was going to be written by nobody else. Chapter 4: The Church Girl's Choice. Issei had expected Rias to send Akino. Instead she sent Asia. It was a smart move, whether Rias had calculated it as such or simply made the emotional choice. Asia Argento appeared at his front door on the 4th morning, wearing her school uniform, her blonde hair held back with a green clip, her expression doing the complicated thing it always did when she was trying to be calm and failing in the most obvious possible way. Rias-san asked me to find you, Asia said, before he could say anything. She is worried. I know, Issei said. A pause. Asia looked at her shoes. She had a habit of doing that when she was about to say something true. I am also worried, she said. But not for the same reason as Rias-san. He stepped aside and let her in. She came into the kitchen and sat at the table in the way she always sat, with her hands folded in front of her and her back very straight, a habit left over from convent years that she had never fully shed. He made tea because it gave his hands something to do. You heard us talking, Asia said. Not a question. He set a cup in front of her and sat across the table. 4 nights ago, he confirmed. Asia closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them they were clear and direct, which was how she looked when she had made a decision she was going to hold. I want you to know that what Akino-san said is not how I see you, she said. It has never been how I see you. You were the first person in my entire life who was kind to me without wanting something from me. Without needing me to be useful. I know what it feels like to be valued only for what you can provide. I was valued for my sacred gear for as long as I can remember. First by the church, then by the rogue exorcists, then by Rias-san. Asia, he said carefully. I am not finished, she said, with a quiet firmness that surprised him. I am going to tell you something that I have been thinking about since that night, and I need to say all of it before I lose the courage. He nodded and waited. Rias-san is not a bad person. I believe that. She is a person who learned to lead a peerage in a world where people are categorized by their value, and she has absorbed that framework so completely that she does not always notice when she is applying it to people who deserve better. Asia looked at her tea. But I have been a pawn in her peerage, and I have watched how she speaks about the people she is supposed to care for, and I have felt the difference between being someone's teammate and being someone's asset, and I know which one you have been treated as. The kitchen was quiet. Distantly, outside, a car passed on the wet street. What are you trying to say? Issei asked. I am saying that I came here to find you for Rias-san, Asia said, but I am not going back to tell her where you are. I am saying that if you are building something new, something real, I want to know if there is a place in it for someone like me. He looked at her across the table. She looked back at him, steady and a little frightened and entirely resolved. You understand what that means, he said. Leaving the Gremory peerage is not simple. Rias has the right to object. It could create a political situation. I know. And you are still asking. I am asking, Asia said, because the alternative is staying somewhere I already know I do not truly belong, and I have done that my entire life, and I am tired. The word tired, coming from Asia, who was one of the most quietly resilient people he had ever met, landed differently than it would have from anyone else. It had weight to it. The weight of someone who had been holding a particular posture for so long that the effort had become invisible even to her, and who had finally set it down. There is a place for you, Issei said. There will always be a place for you. Asia exhaled. Something in her shoulders nodded visibly. What are you planning to do? She asked. I am going to build something, he said. Something that does not belong to any of the existing factions. Something independent. He paused. It is going to be dangerous. Everything is dangerous, Asia said, with a practicality that she had learned from surviving things that would have destroyed most people. At least this would be dangerous in a direction I have chosen. He almost smiled for the first time in 4 days. I have one more person to talk to today, he said. Come with me. Asia looked at the door, and then back at him. Should I be worried about this person? Possibly, Issei said honestly. But less than you were a week ago. Chapter 5: The Huntress at the Crossroads. Kuroka was not someone who came to meetings. She was someone you found, usually when she had already decided to allow herself to be found, which was a meaningful distinction. Issei had spent most of the previous day leaving deliberate traces of his movements in areas he knew the S-class Nekomata stray devil used as transit corridors. Not traps, not invitations exactly, more like a message written in the language of someone who understood how to move without being seen and was choosing, carefully, to be slightly visible. Kuroka found him on the bridge over the old river canal just before noon, dropping from somewhere above with the easy, boneless grace of a cat that had never once in its life considered the concept of a difficult landing. She landed beside him on the railing with her hands in the sleeves of her kimono, and her golden eyes doing the lazy half-lidded thing that was her default expression and that fooled approximately no one who had been paying attention. Issei Hyoudou, she said, drawing out his name like she was tasting it. You have been very interesting lately. I have been trying to avoid being interesting, he said. I am not doing well at it. No, she agreed pleasantly. Every faction in the territory has noticed you going quiet. Quiet from someone like you is louder than most people yelling. She tilted her head. The Gremry girl is upset. Probably. Her knight, Yudokiba, has been running the eastern districts looking for you. Her queen, Hinajima Akino, has been watching the ley lines for your energy signature. Kuroka examined her nails. They are very motivated. I expected that. Did you expect that Sirzex Lucifer has been quietly briefed about your absence from the peerage? That was new information. Issei held his expression steady. That is faster than I thought, he said. Rias Gremry is his sister, Kuroka said simply. He protects her interests. He will not intervene directly because that would be politically awkward, but he has asked certain people to report on your location and activities. How do you know all of this? Kuroka smiled, bright and sharp and entirely pleased with herself. I am a stray devil who has survived 6 years of being hunted by every Mao-affiliated cleanup team in the underworld, she said. I know things because knowing things is what keeps me breathing. Asia, who had been standing slightly behind Issei and trying very hard not to look alarmed by the S-class criminal on the railing, made a small sound. Kuroka's golden eyes moved to her immediately, with the sudden absolute attention of a predator that has detected movement. The healer, Kuroka said. Not unkind. Assessing. Asia Argento, Asia said, with remarkable steadiness. Please do not look at me like that. Kuroka blinked. Then she laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of her. I like her, Kuroka announced. Why did you bring her? Because I am not having any conversation in secret anymore, Issei said. The people I want to build with know what I am building. That means everyone is present for the important discussions. Kuroka considered this for a moment, her tail flicking once behind her. You want me for something specific, she said. You are the most capable independent devil in this territory, Issei said. You have senjutsu that rivals seated officers. You have survived and operated alone in an environment designed to eliminate you. And you are looking for your younger sister, who is currently in the Citri peerage, and you are not finding a way to reach her because every approach you have tried has been too dangerous. Kuroka went very still. How do you know about Chiron? She asked, and the lazy warmth had entirely left her voice. Kaneko, Chiron, is in my former peerage, Issei said. I know her. I have known her for months. She is not happy. She does not talk about you, but she does not talk about a great many things, and there is a particular kind of careful silence she keeps around certain subjects that is very specific. He looked at Kuroka directly. I cannot promise to get her out of the Gremry peerage immediately. That requires political leverage I do not have yet. But I can promise that if you work with me, gaining that leverage becomes a shared goal, and I do not abandon shared goals. Kuroka was silent for a long moment. The canal water moved below them. You are asking me to trust you, she said. I am asking you to trust that we want the same things for different reasons, and that wanting the same things is enough to start with, he said. Trust comes from watching someone. I am not asking for it in advance. She looked at him for a long, slow, measuring moment. Then she looked at Asia. What do you think of him? She asked the blonde girl, with genuine curiosity. Asia thought about it seriously. I think he means what he says, she said. I have not always been very good at recognizing people who mean what they say. But I think I am learning. Kuroka made a soft, thoughtful sound. I will not join anything formally, she said. Not yet. But I will stop avoiding you, which for me is approximately the same thing. She dropped from the railing and landed on the bridge with no sound whatsoever. You have 1 week before the Gremory girl stops looking and starts demanding. You should use it well. I know, Issei said. Kuroka walked away without looking back, her kimono sleeves swaying, her black tail curled upward at the tip. She turned a corner, and was gone. Asia let out a very long breath. She is terrifying, Asia said. Yes, Issei agreed. She is also exactly what we need. Chapter 6 The Weight of a Name. He returned to the Gremory clubroom on the 7th day. He went alone because what needed to happen there was not something Asia or Raynare or Kuroka could make easier, and trying to use their presence as a buffer would be a kind of cowardice he had decided he was not going to practice anymore. The old building was exactly as he remembered it, the high ceilings, the chairs arranged around the low table, the window light falling across the floor and the long rectangles of late afternoon. Rias was standing when he entered, which meant she had been waiting, which meant someone had told her he was coming, which meant Kuroka had been right about the surveillance on his energy signature. She looked at him with an expression he had trouble reading at first, and then recognized as something he had rarely seen on her face: genuine uncertainty. Akino was seated by the window. Kiba stood near the door. Kaneko was on the sofa with her cat ears slightly flattened, which was her version of visible distress. Of all the expressions in the room, Kaneko's affected him most unexpectedly. Issei, Ria said. Her voice was carefully neutral, which was its own kind of signal. Rias Bucho, he said, and the title sat strangely in his mouth. Sit down, she said. Please. He sat. She sat across from him. The others held their positions, which was very deliberately arranged, and he noted it and chose to let it be what it was. You heard our conversation, Rias said. Not a question. She had clearly spent 7 days arriving at this conclusion. Yes. How much of it? Enough. A silence. Akino was looking at her hands. Kiba was looking at nothing with the focused discipline of someone who had decided not to have a visible reaction until he understood what was happening. I owe you an apology, Rias said, and the words came out measured and precise, the way she said things when she had rehearsed them enough to make them sound unrehearsed. I spoke about you in a way that was unfair and reductive. I do value you. What I said that night was not the whole truth of how I feel, and it was said in a context that I did not intend for you to hear, but I understand that the context does not change what you heard. Issei listened to all of it. I appreciate that, he said, when she finished. I mean it. I know that was not easy to say. Rias looked slightly surprised, as though she had expected a harder response. But Issei continued, and she closed her eyes briefly. The apology does not change the fact that what you said was true. Not the harsh version of it, but the essential structure of it. I am a pawn in your peerage. You recruited me for my sacred gear. You have managed my feelings, not cruelly, but deliberately, because a motivated Issei is a more effective Issei. He paused. All of that is true. And I have been operating inside that structure without understanding it, which means every decision I have made since I was reincarnated has been made without full information. You make it sound like a deception, Rias said, and there was something real and stung in her voice now. I am not saying you are a villain, Issei said. I am saying that the framework you are operating inside treats people as pieces, and you have absorbed that framework so thoroughly that you do not always notice when you are applying it to people who would prefer to be treated as people. He looked at her steadily. You are not the only one who has absorbed that framework. The entire supernatural world runs on it. But I am not willing to keep operating inside it. The room was very quiet. Kaneko's ears had come back up, which he noticed. What do you want, Issei? Rias asked, and it was the most direct question she had ever asked him, stripped of all the peerage leader cadence she usually carried. Content. Pushpai want to renegotiate, he said. I do not want to sever the peerage bond under hostile terms. That is bad for everyone and it creates political problems neither of us needs. But I want to operate independently. I want the freedom to build alliances, make decisions, and grow in directions I choose, without those directions being determined by what serves the Gremry peerage. That is not how peerages work, Aquino said from the window. Not hostile. Factual. I know, Issei said. Which is why I am not asking for what the existing rules allow. I am proposing something new. He looked at Rias. You are the daughter of Xiaticus Gremry and the sister of Serzex Lucifer. You have more political flexibility than any other young devil in this territory. If anyone can establish a precedent for a different kind of peerage structure, it is you. Rias looked at him for a long moment. You have thought about this very carefully, she said. I had 7 days, he said. Something shifted in her expression. Something that had been held tightly for a week loosened slightly, not all the way, but enough to change the shape of her face. I want to think about this, she said. I want to have this conversation properly, with time and full attention. Not today. She looked at him with something that was not quite the warmth she used to direct at him, but was not its absence either. Something new and more honest than either. Can you give me that? Yes, he said. He stood. He looked around the room, at Aquino who was finally looking back at him with an expression he had never seen her wear before, at Kiba who gave him a small nod that carried more weight than a speech would have, at Kaneko whose ears were fully upright now and whose eyes were doing something quiet and unreadable. One more thing, Issei said at the door. He looked at Kaneko specifically. Chiron. Your sister is alive and she misses you. That is not a manipulation. It is just something I thought you should hear. Kaneko's eyes went wide. She looked at him with an expression she had never once directed at him before, something completely unguarded and very young. He left before she could respond, because some moments needed space around them. Outside, in the corridor, he breathed slowly and steadily, and thought about the conversation that had just happened, and decided it had gone as well as something that difficult could reasonably go. His phone buzzed. A message from a number he had not saved yet but recognized from the pattern of the sender. Raynare. There is a fallen angel intelligence officer watching your apartment building. He arrived this morning. He is not here on Grigori authorization. He is here on behalf of someone older. Issei put his phone away and walked faster. The 7 days of quiet were over. Chapter 7. The Old Power. The intelligence officer's name was Donasik, and Issei recognized him. He was one of the fallen angels who had accompanied Raynare on the night of the original attack, one of the 3 who had held the barrier around the old church while Raynare operated inside. He had survived that night, had presumably continued his existence as a mid-level Grigori operative, and had now apparently been hired out for something unofficial. Raynare had positioned herself on the rooftop across the street from Issei's apartment building. She was not visible. She was telling him through the communication sigils she had constructed that Donasik was in the building's shadow with a recording array, collecting energy signature data. Someone wants a detailed read on the boosted gear, Issei said quietly, standing on the sidewalk with his phone to his ear as a cover. They want more than a read, Raynare's voice said through the sigil, translated into his earpiece. The array he is using is a resonance mapper. They are trying to understand the current state of the gear's development. Standard intelligence collection precedes either an approach or an acquisition attempt. Acquisition, Issei said. Someone wants the boosted gear and is doing their research before making a move, Raynare confirmed. My best read on the patron is Kokabil. Drag, inside the sacred gear, made a sound that was the dragon equivalent of sharp attention. Kokabil, Drag said, for Issei's benefit alone. One of the most powerful fallen angels in existence. A war hawk. Someone who has wanted a new great war for centuries. If he is interested in the boosted gear, Issei said quietly, he is thinking about using it as a war-starting device. Or using the wielder as one, Drake said. Issei looked at the building. At the shadow where Donasik was doing his work. He thought about the simplest possible response, which was to go in there, use the boosted gear at scale, and make the intelligence collection a very short-lived project. He discarded it. Donaseek was a symptom. Dealing with him accomplished nothing except alerting Kokobile that the target was aware. He thought about the second option, which was to disappear, to move his base of operations somewhere that was not his childhood home, and where resonance mapping would be complicated by environmental noise. That bought time but not safety. He thought about the third option, which was the one he had been building toward for a week and which Donaseek's presence had just made more urgent. He needed standing. He needed political existence that was not defined by the Gremry peerage, but that was recognized by enough of the supernatural world that moving against him would have consequences. Independent, acknowledged standing. He needed his evil pieces. The thought arrived with the weight of something that had been waiting in the back of his mind since the corridor. Pawn pieces could be promoted. Pawns who crossed the entire board of the rating game system, who demonstrated sufficient power and independence, could be promoted to positions of formal recognition. Not under a king. On their own. It had happened before, in ancient history, before the current rating game system formalized the rules. Devils of sufficient power, and will had claimed independent pieces, had built their own small courts, had operated outside the peerage ladder. The Mao system had gradually absorbed or eliminated most of them, but the legal mechanism had never been fully removed from the Devil Code. It was a legal ghost, a path that existed on paper, and had not been walked in 500 years. Drake, he said. I know what you are thinking, the dragon said. Is it possible? A long pause. It is possible, Drake said. It will require a rating game challenge against an acknowledged king. If you win, the victor's right allows you to claim the pieces of the defeated king, which in the hands of an unaffiliated devil creates the foundation for an independent court. The legal mechanism exists. Whether anyone will honor it depends on who witnesses it, and whether you make refusing to honor it more trouble than accepting it. Who would accept a rating game challenge from an unaffiliated pawn, Issei said. Someone who either underestimates you or wants to help you, Drake said, and I suspect you have someone in mind for the second category. Issei had someone in mind for the second category. He turned away from the building and walked in the direction of the shrine garden. Raynare fell into step beside him from a side street, appearing with the soundless efficiency of someone who had been doing this for a long time. Donaseek? Issei asked. I disrupted his array, she said. He will have partial data at best. It will not tell Kokobile anything useful about the gear's current state. Issei glanced at her. You disrupted a Grigori operative surveillance without being asked, he said. She looked straight ahead, her hands in her pockets, her dark wings compressed into near invisibility under a glamour. Do not make it into something, she said. I simply prefer that Kokobile not have useful intelligence on people I am currently standing near. Of course, Issei said. They walked in silence for half a block. Thank you, he said. Raynare said nothing. But the line of her shoulders shifted, very slightly, in a way that was not nothing. Above them, the afternoon sky had gone the dark gold of late autumn, and the first wind of real cold was moving through the streets of Ko, and somewhere in the underworld a war hawk was studying incomplete data and wondering what the boosted gear's wielder was becoming. He was becoming something none of their categories had room for. That was the point. Act 2 The Board Before the Storm. Chapter 8 The House on the Eastern Hill. The building had been empty for 11 years. It sat on the eastern slope of Koa's hills in a neighborhood that had gone quiet slowly, the way quiet neighborhoods always do, not from any single dramatic event but from the gradual accumulated weight of families moving closer to the commercial district, of young people leaving for the city, of property values settling into the kind of patient stillness that precedes either renovation or further decay. The house itself was 3 stories, built in a style that mixed traditional Japanese architecture with something older and less identifiable, with high ceilings and deep eaves and a garden that had been wild for a decade but that still held, if you looked carefully, the bones of something once deliberately tended. Kuroka had found it. She had not found it through any process that involved paperwork or property registries. She had found it the way she found most useful things, through the particular combination of supernatural awareness and practical survival instinct that 11 years of being hunted had refined to a very sharp edge. The building had an energy signature that was old and layered, the kind that accumulated in a structure that had housed supernatural activity for long enough that the walls themselves began to hold impressions. It was not currently occupied by anything hostile. It was not claimed by any faction. And its position on the hill gave sightlines across the entire eastern approach to Ko while remaining invisible from the town center. She had mentioned it to Issei with the deliberate casualness of someone who had already decided it was useful, and was pretending to be offering it as a casual suggestion. Issei had looked at her with the expression he used when he recognized that someone was pretending to be less invested than they were, and had simply said that it sounded good. It had taken 2 days to make the ground floor habitable. Raynare had removed what she described as 3 minor warding arrays left by a previous occupant, none of them dangerous, all of them interesting in ways she had declined to elaborate on. Asia had cleaned with the focused thoroughness of someone who had grown up in institutions that treated cleanliness as a form of moral character. Kuroka had reorganized the garden in a single afternoon without explaining what she was reorganizing it into, and when Issei went to look afterward he found that the wild growth had been shaped into something that looked natural from outside the property line but that functioned, from inside, as a layered perimeter detection system rooted in senjutsu. He had stood in the garden, looking at what she had built, and had said quietly that it was extraordinary. Kuroka had been sitting on the garden wall eating an onigiri and had said, equally quietly, that she knew. By the end of the 3rd day, the house on the eastern hill had a kitchen that worked, a room for each person, a wardroom on the 2nd floor that Raynare had converted into an intelligence analysis space with 4 walls covered in maps and information boards, and a large open space on the ground floor that Issei was using as a training area. It felt, he thought, like a beginning, not a comfortable beginning. Everyone in the building was still in the process of learning what kind of distance to keep from everyone else. Raynare and Kuroka occupied the same space with the elaborate, careful neutrality of 2 very powerful individuals who had independently decided not to start anything but who were absolutely assessing each other in every moment. Asia navigated between them with a gentle persistence that was either very brave or very oblivious, and was probably both. Drake observed all of it, and occasionally offered observations that Issei relayed to no one because some things were funnier if they stayed internal. On the 4th evening, Issei sat in the wardroom with Raynare while she walked him through everything she knew about Kokabile. The picture that emerged was not reassuring. Kokabile was one of the original fallen angels, one of the first generation to fall before the formal structure of Grigori had been established. He was not simply powerful in the way that senior supernatural beings were powerful, which was to say extremely but within a recognizable framework. He was powerful in the way that things which had existed since the early ages of the world were powerful, which was to say in ways that did not always follow the logic of current supernatural taxonomy. He wanted a new great war. He had wanted it for centuries. The current peace between the 3 factions, fragile and bureaucratic and built on mutual exhaustion more than genuine goodwill, was in his view an insult to what angels and devils and fallen were supposed to be doing, which was fighting each other in the grand and cataclysmic tradition of everything that had come before. He is not simply a warmonger, Raynare said, moving a pin on the intelligence board. That framing makes him sound like someone who wants violence for violence's sake, which is not accurate. He genuinely believes that the current peace is an aberration, that the supernatural world has a correct order, and that order is defined by conflict and dominance. He wants a war because he believes it will restore what he sees as the natural hierarchy. And in his vision of the natural hierarchy, Issei said someone holding the boosted gear is either a very powerful weapon or a very significant threat. Both, Raynare said. If he can direct the boosted gear, he has a war-starting device of unparalleled legitimacy. The Sekyudai taking a side would be a signal to every supernatural faction in the world that the balance has shifted. It would justify immediate escalation from all parties, and if he cannot direct me, he eliminates the risk and uses your death as a provocation. A Sekyudai killed by fallen angels gives the devil faction a casus belli that Serzek's Lucifer would struggle to ignore regardless of his personal preference for peace. Issei was quiet for a moment. He has thought about this carefully, he said. He has been thinking about it for centuries, Raynare said. Do not underestimate the patience of something that old. How long do we have before he moves from intelligence collection to direct action? Raynare tilted her head, calculating. Donnelly came back with partial data, she said. Kokabeel will want a complete picture before he commits. He will send someone more capable next time, or he will create a situation that draws you out rather than watching you statically. She looked at the board. 2 weeks. Perhaps 3 if we are careful. Then we need to move faster than 2 weeks, Issei said. He looked at the board. At the map of Ko and the surrounding supernatural territory. At the network of faction lines and ancient agreements that divided it like invisible fence lines. He needed the raiding game. He needed independent standing. And he needed both of those things before Kokabeel decided that waiting was not worth the risk. I need to make a contact in the underworld, he said. Someone who can facilitate a formal raiding game challenge without routing it through Rias. Raynare considered for a moment. Then she moved a different pin on the board. There is someone, she said. But you will not like how I know him. Chapter 9 The Broker. His name was Zephyros, and he was a devil of the middle class who had spent the last 2 centuries building a career as an independent facilitator of supernatural agreements and transactions that the major factions preferred not to officially acknowledge. He was not powerful in any direct physical sense. He was powerful in the way that certain very specific kinds of information and access were powerful, which was to say in ways that were difficult to replace and extremely expensive to try. He knew everyone. He remembered everything. He had at some point done something useful for virtually every significant entity in the supernatural world, and the favors owed to him formed a web so dense and complex that attacking him was more trouble than it was worth. He operated out of a pocket dimension accessible through a specific alley in the commercial district of the nearest mid-sized city, a door that looked like the back entrance to a dry cleaning establishment, and that opened, if you knew the correct way to knock, into a space considerably larger and more elaborately furnished than the exterior suggested. Raynare knew the knock. She had been here twice before, for reasons she had declined to specify, and Issei had chosen to respect that boundary and file it away. Zephyros was a tall devil with ash-gray hair cut very short, and eyes the color of old bronze, wearing a suit that had been expensive approximately 40 years ago, and that he had maintained with obsessive care ever since. He looked at Issei with the expression of someone who had been expecting this particular visit eventually. The security, he said, which was not a greeting but was something. And Raynare. I heard you were reconstructed. You look well. Reconstructed things often look slightly wrong, but you seem to have avoided that. He gestured at 2 chairs arranged before an enormous desk that was covered in papers, sealed documents, and at least 3 devices Issei could not identify. Sit. They sat. Zephyros moved behind his desk with the unhurried efficiency of someone who operated entirely on his own schedule and saw no reason to pretend otherwise. You want to register a raiding game challenge, he said, before Issei had said anything. As an unaffiliated party. Which is technically possible under the old code but has not been done in approximately 5 centuries and which will cause an extraordinary amount of administrative inconvenience for everyone involved, including me. Can you facilitate it? Issei asked. Zephyros looked at him over the rim of reading glasses that were entirely unnecessary for a devil of his age but that he seemed to wear on principle. I can facilitate virtually anything, he said. The question is whether the cost is one you can meet. Name it. Zephyros set down his glasses and folded his hands on the desk. The old code allows an unaffiliated challenger to register a raiding game on the basis of what is called a sovereign claim. This requires 3 things. First, a formal declaration of independent status witnessed by at least 2 entities of recognized supernatural standing from different factions. Second, a willing opponent who holds king status and who agrees to a stakes match, meaning the victor's right clause is in effect. Third, a guarantee of non-interference from the territory's governing peerage, which in Ko means the Gremry House. Issei processed this. The third requirement is the most complicated, he said. The third requirement is the reason no one has attempted a sovereign claim in 5 centuries, Zephyros agreed pleasantly. Sitting peerages do not generally enjoy creating precedents that suggest their pawns can simply decide to play independently. Rias might agree, Issei said. She was willing to discuss renegotiation. Raynare made a small sound that was not quite skeptical but was adjacent to it. Discussing renegotiation and formally endorsing an action that sets a precedent for pawn independence throughout the underworld are two very different things, she said. Issei acknowledged this with a nod. Who would be a willing opponent? He asked Zephyros. The broker opened a drawer and produced a thin folder, which he slid across the desk. Lord Zagan, Zephyros said. A mid-ranked king in the underworld's western territory. He is, by any reasonable assessment, someone you could defeat given your current capabilities. He knows this. He is agreeing to the match for two reasons. First, because he owes me a favor of sufficient size that I am calling it now. Second, because a public rating game that establishes the sovereign claim precedent creates market conditions that benefit him politically in ways that are complicated to explain, and that you do not need to understand fully. He is using the match too, Issei said. Everyone uses everything, Zephyros said, without any particular judgment. The question is whether the mutual use is acceptable. Issei opened the folder and looked at the information inside. Zagan's peerage composition, his known combat record, his sacred gear if any, his strategic tendencies. It was thorough. This is already prepared, Issei said. I have been preparing it since the day you left your peerage, Zephyros said. I am a broker. I anticipate transactions. Issei looked at him steadily. What do you want in return? Zephyros smiled, and it was the smile of someone who had been waiting for the right moment to deliver a specific sentence. When you have built what you are building, the broker said, and you will build it, I have no doubt about that, I want first access trading rights. Not exclusive. First. When you have something to offer the supernatural world, I hear about it before anyone else. When you need something from the supernatural world, I am the first person you call. That is a very long-term investment in someone you have just met, Issei said. I am 240 years old, Zephyros said. I have learned to recognize which investments are worth making before they become obvious. A silence. Raynare was watching Zephyros with the focused attention of someone cataloging something for later use. Issei thought about it. It was not a bad deal. First access trading rights with an established broker was exactly the kind of relationship a new independent court needed. And a broker who had a personal stake in your success was more reliable than one who simply took fees. Agreed, Issei said. Zephyros produced a small card and slid it across the desk. Return within 4 days with the Gremry girl's endorsement, and your 2 witnesses, he said. I will have the paperwork ready. Oh, and Mr. Hyoudou. He picked up his reading glasses again. Be careful going home tonight. Donasek has been replaced. The new watcher is considerably more capable. He opened a book on his desk with the finality of someone whose meetings always ended on his schedule. They left. Chapter 10 Rias Gremry's answer. He went to her alone. This was deliberate. Bringing anyone else to this conversation would change what it was, would make it a negotiation between representatives rather than what it needed to be, which was honest. He found Rias in the Gremry Manor's outer garden, which occupied a pocket of underworld space that folded neatly against the edge of the school grounds in Kuo. She was sitting on a stone bench with a book open on her lap that she was not reading, which she closed when he arrived with the precise, unhurried motion of someone who had been expecting this and had decided how to receive it. She looked tired. He had not fully registered it when he had last seen her in the clubroom, had been too focused on managing his own steadiness to read her clearly. But seeing her now, in the low afternoon light of the underworld, he noticed it. The tiredness was not physical. It was the tiredness of someone who had spent a week in sustained and difficult self-examination, which was a process that did not leave visible marks but that hollowed something out behind the eyes. Issei, she said. Rias-san, he said, and the drop of the title suffix was slight but deliberate, and she heard it. She moved to make room on the bench. He sat beside her, not close, but in the same direction, both of them looking at the garden rather than at each other, which was sometimes the way to have the conversations that were too large to conduct face to face. I have been thinking, she said. About what you said. About the framework. Waited. You were right, she said, and the sentence was clean and even and had clearly cost her something to produce. Not about everything, but about the essential thing. I did absorb the way this world categorizes people, and I applied it to you without fully examining whether it was something I actually believed or simply something I had inherited. That is not an excuse. It is an explanation, and I know the difference. I know you do, he said. A bird somewhere in the garden made a sound. The light shifted. I also think, Rias said, with a careful precision that told him she had rehearsed this part more than the other, that I have been afraid. Not of you. Of the possibility that if I examined my relationships in the peerage with the same honesty I apply to rating game strategy, I would find that I am not as good at connection as I tell myself I am. And I was right to be afraid of that, because looking at it clearly is exactly as uncomfortable as I expected. He looked at her profile. She was still looking at the garden. For what it is worth, he said, I do not think you are a bad person. I think you are someone who was given enormous responsibility very young, inside a system that treats people as pieces, and who has been trying to do right by that responsibility in the only language the system provided. Rias closed her eyes briefly. That is a generous reading, she said. It is the accurate one, he said. I would not have stayed in the peerage as long as I did if there was nothing real in it. There was something real. It was just mixed up with something that was not. They were quiet together for a moment. What do you need from me? She asked. Specifically, he told her about the sovereign claim. He told her about Sephiroth, about Sagan, about the legal mechanism, about what the endorsement meant politically. He told her all of it without softening any of the inconvenient parts, because asking someone for something while hiding the cost of it was a version of the problem he was trying to move away from. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. You are asking me to sign something that says my pawn has the right to operate independently of my peerage, she said. Yes. That will create a precedent. My father will not be happy. Xraynarex will need to handle political questions about it from other noble houses. I know. And you are asking me anyway. I am asking you because it is your choice to make, he said. Not because I expect you to say yes, and not because I am going to pressure you if you say no. Whatever you decide, I will find another way. But I wanted to ask you first because the honest thing to do was to ask. Rias looked at the garden for a long time. There is also Kokobile, she said quietly. You did not mention him, but I have received intelligence reports as well. I know he is interested in the boosted gear. Issei said nothing. If you have independent standing, she said slowly, then Kokobile moving against you is an attack on an acknowledged sovereign entity, not simply violence against the stray pawn. That changes the diplomatic calculus significantly. The Mao faction would be obligated to respond in a way they would not be if you were simply a loose piece. That is one of the reasons the standing matters. Yes, he said. You are thinking 3 steps ahead, she said. I have had good teachers, he said, and there was no bitterness in it, which surprised her visibly. She stood up. She walked a few paces into the garden and stood with her back to him for a moment, her red hair very bright in the low light, her hands at her sides. Then she turned around. I will sign the endorsement, she said. Not because of the Kokobile logic, though that is sound. Because you came and asked me honestly and told me the full cost and did not try to hide any of it, and because that is the kind of thing that deserves a real answer. He stood as well. Thank you, Rias, he said. Not the title. Her name. Something in her expression shifted. Something that had been held at a careful distance for the whole conversation moved closer, and then she composed it again with the ease of someone who had a great deal of practice. I want one thing in return, she said. Name it. When this is over, whatever this becomes, you come back and tell me about it. Not as a report to a superior. As someone telling someone else what they have been doing. She met his eyes. I would like to know how it turns out. I will tell you, he said. I promise. He left the garden as the light of the underworld shifted toward evening, and behind him he did not see Rias sit back down on the bench and look at the space where he had been sitting with an expression that was not quite any single named emotion, but that was very much the face of someone who has understood something important a little too late to apply it. Chapter 11. 2 Witnesses. The first witness was Xraynarex Lucifer. This had not been part of Issei's plan. Xraynarex had sent a message through Graphia, his wife and the silver-haired maid who was arguably more quietly formidable than her husband, asking for a meeting at a location of Issei's choosing. The message had been polite, formal, and contained a postscript in Serzex's own handwriting that said, simply, I am not coming as the Mao. I am coming as Rias's brother. There is a difference. Issei had chosen the house on the eastern hill because it was his territory, and because choosing your own territory for meetings was something Drake had spent one entire morning explaining was important. Serzex Lucifer arrived alone, without Graphia, without bodyguards, in a simple dark shirt and slacks that looked less like a man who ran 1/4 of the devil government, and more like a university professor on a weekend. He had the same red hair as Rias and the same quality of attention, the kind that made you aware of being seen clearly, but his was quieter, less declarative. He had learned somewhere along the way to make his intelligence invisible. He looked at the house. He looked at the garden. He looked at Kuroka, who was sitting on the garden wall with her tail and her complete lack of concern about who was arriving. Kuroka, he said, with mild surprise. Lucifer-sama, she said, eating a rice cracker. He did not pursue it. He turned to Issei. You are building something here, he said. Yes, Issei said. And my sister has agreed to endorse your sovereign claim. Yes. Serzex nodded slowly. He looked at the garden again. I want to be clear about why I am here, he said. I am not here to prevent this or to create obstacles. I am here because I received the intelligence reports about Kokabeel and I understand the situation, and I think that what you are attempting is, in fact, the correct response to it. He paused. I am also here because my sister signed an endorsement, and I wanted to look the person she signed it for in the face and determine whether my read on the situation was accurate. And your read? Issei asked. Serzex almost smiled. My read is that you are an extraordinarily unusual young man who has decided to become something genuinely new rather than a better version of something existing, and that this decision is going to be very inconvenient for a large number of important people and very interesting to watch. He reached into his jacket and produced a small sealed document. This is a Mao-level witness certification, he said. It is dated today and it names me as one of the 2 required witnesses for your sovereign claim registration. I am giving it to you freely, without political conditions, because I believe the Kokabeel situation makes your independent standing a net positive for devil interests, and because I believe Rias made the right choice, and because he paused. Because I have been watching you operate inside my sister's peerage for months, and I think you deserve better than what you got. That is a personal judgment, not a political one, but I see no reason not to act on both simultaneously. Issei took the document carefully. 1 witness down, he said. I still need the second. From a different faction. I know, Serzex said. Which is why I suggested someone before I came here. He turned and looked toward the garden gate, which swung open. The second witness arrived on light feet with the sound of small bells, and Issei recognized her with a start. Raynare Hyoudou. Childhood friend. Reincarnated angel. Currently serving as an emissary under the joint angel-devil peace framework that Serzex himself had helped construct. She was in her church uniform, carrying a sword at her hip, and her expression was doing the complicated oscillation between earnest and dramatic that was her default setting for anything she considered significant. Kun. She announced, as though he had not just seen her walk through his garden gate. I have been authorized by Heaven's administration to serve as an angel faction witness for the sovereign claim registration of Issei Hyoudou, and I would like you to know that this is an incredibly significant thing, and you should feel very honored. I do feel honored, Issei said. Did you want tea? Yes, please, Irina said immediately, and then seemed to feel this undercut the ceremony somewhat. Serzex watched this exchange with the expression of a man who found the world genuinely entertaining. Irina represents a genuine diplomatic flexibility from Heaven's side that I was not entirely confident they would agree to, he told Issei quietly, while Irina went inside with Asia, who had appeared at the door with a pot already in hand. Whoever authorized this is watching your situation closely and has decided that a security with independent standing that is not allied to any faction is less of a complication than one who is either Gremry controlled or lost to Kokabeel. Pushpevan is also afraid of Kokabeel, Issei said. Everyone is afraid of Kokabeel, Serzex said simply. He is the kind of problem that all 3 factions would prefer to avoid dealing with by having him not do anything. The reason he has been allowed to exist this long is that moving against him directly would itself be the kind of action that starts the war he wants. Issei filed this away. Thank you, he said to Xraynarex, for the witness certification and for coming. Xraynarex inclined his head with the ease of someone for whom grace came naturally. Do not get killed, he said. Rias would never forgive herself. He left before tea was ready, which was its own kind of statement. Chapter 12 The Dragon Prepares. 3 days before the raiding game against Sagan, Issei went into the mountains. Alone. He told the others where he was going and approximately when he would be back, and he left before anyone could decide to come with him, because what he needed to do in the mountains was not something that benefited from witnesses. He had been building toward this conversation with Drake for days. The dragon had been unusually quiet, which for Drake meant he was either thinking deeply about something or building towards saying something difficult. Given everything that had happened recently, Issei suspected both. He climbed until the town was entirely invisible below him, until there was nothing around him but rock and old pine and the wind that came down from the higher peaks carrying cold that had started somewhere much farther away. He sat on a flat stone overlooking a valley, and he put his left hand on his knee and looked at the boosted gear. Talk to me, he said. Drake manifested in the way he sometimes did when they were completely alone, not as an avatar or a visual projection, but as a weight in the air beside Issei, a presence so dense with age and power that it had texture even without form. When Drake spoke this way, his voice came from everywhere at once. The raiding game against Sagan, the dragon said. You intend to win it? Yes. Without using the juggernaut drive. Correct. Or the full balance breaker at sustained output. Issei looked at the valley. I need to win this match in a way that shows control, he said. Not raw power. Anyone watching this match, and many people will be watching this match, needs to see something precise. Something that indicates I can bring everything I have to bear and choose exactly how much of it to use. Drake was quiet for a moment. You are already thinking about the audience, the dragon said. Not just the match. The match is the least important thing about this raiding game, Issei said. The statement it makes is everything. A long pause. The wind came through the pines with a sound like something breathing. I want to tell you something, Drake said, and there was a quality in his voice that Issei had not heard before, something that was not exactly hesitation but was its older, heavier cousin. About my previous wielders. About why I never told them certain things. Go ahead. Every wielder of the boosted gear before you came to me already knowing what they wanted to be, Drake said. They came in the middle of the story, in the sense that they had already written the first act, and they wanted the boosted gear to serve as the instrument of what they had already decided. They wanted power, or revenge, or dominance, or survival, and they used me as a tool toward those ends. And I served that role because serving that role was the function I was created for. The weight in the air shifted. You came to me before you knew your own story, Drake said. You were a 17-year-old boy who wanted to be a good person and did not have a clear picture of what that meant in a world that runs on the logic of power. You had not decided what to be. You were still deciding. I am still deciding, Issei said quietly. Yes, Drake said. And that is the thing. Every other wielder arrived with a completed self. You are constructing yours in real time, with full awareness, making deliberate choices about what kind of person to become. That is not how most people live. Most people simply become what their circumstances produce. You are refusing to. He paused. That is why the sovereign's amplification will awaken in you, Drake said. Not because you are the strongest wielder I have had, though you will be. Because you are the first one I have wanted to tell things to. The first one where I found myself thinking this one should know more. This one can use it correctly. Issei was quiet for a long time. The valley spread below them in the afternoon light, green and silver and very far away. You trust me, he said. Not a surprise statement. Something that needed to be said out loud to be real. Yes, Drake said. I trust you. It is a strange feeling. I have not trusted a wielder in 800 years. The last one you trusted, Issei said carefully. What happened? A long silence. He made a mistake, Drake said. Not a moral one. A tactical one. He trusted the wrong person at the wrong moment, and it cost him everything. The weight in the air shifted again, something heavier moving through it. I closed myself off after that. I gave my wielders power and function and nothing else. It was safer. But you are choosing differently now, Issei said. I am choosing differently now, Drake confirmed. Because you have already demonstrated that you can look at someone you trusted who let you down, and decide not to let it make you closed. I watched you do it with the Gremory girl. I watched you go back and speak to her honestly and not with cruelty, and not with walls. I decided that if you could do that, then I could do this. Issei put his hand over the sacred gear. We will not make the same mistakes, he said. No, Drake said. We will make new and original ones. But we will make them together, which is better. Issei almost laughed. He stopped it in time. Then he decided there was no reason to stop it, and he let it out, quiet and real in the mountain air. Drake's presence in the air beside him had something in it that might have been the dragon equivalent of the same thing. They stayed in the mountains until the light went entirely, working through the tactical architecture of what the raiding game needed to look like, going over Zagan's known patterns, discussing the specific control techniques that would let Issei demonstrate precision rather than simply overwhelming force. When they came down with a plan so detailed it bordered on obsessive, and Issei felt, for the first time since the corridor, something that was clean and forward-facing and entirely his. Chapter 13. Before the game. The night before the raiding game, the house on the eastern hill was very quiet. Asia had made dinner, which she did with the focused sincerity of someone who had discovered relatively recently that cooking for people she cared about was one of the most direct ways she knew to say things that words were not large enough for. It had been a long meal, unhurried, with the four of them arranged around the kitchen table in the particular comfortable disorder of people who were still learning each other's rhythms, but had made enough progress that the learning felt good rather than effortful. Raynare had eaten without commentary, which was her version of appreciation. Kuroka had eaten 2 portions and fallen asleep on the kitchen windowsill approximately 7 minutes after finishing, her tail curled around her feet, which Asia had covered with a blanket with the quiet efficiency of someone doing something that needed no discussion. Now it was late, and Issei sat in the open doorway of the ground floor, looking at the garden and the dark shape of the city below, and Irina found him there. She had stayed. This had not been in the original plan but had happened naturally, the way things happened with Irina, which was by virtue of her simply being somewhere until being somewhere became being part of something. She had helped Zephyros with the registration paperwork, which had taken most of a day and which she had approached with a dedication to procedural correctness that had visibly impressed the broker. She had eaten dinner and talked with Asia about the convent where Asia had grown up, and the two of them had found, to no one's particular surprise, that they had a great deal in common. She sat down beside him in the doorway with her legs folded under her, and her sword leaning against the frame. "Are you nervous?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "But not about the match." "About what then?" He thought about how to say it. "The match is a demonstration," he said. "Demonstrations can go wrong. Not because you are not capable enough but because the audience reads what you do through the lens of what they expect, and if I do not manage the display carefully, the message gets lost in the spectacle." Irina was quiet for a moment. "You mean you are worried that if you win too easily it looks arrogant," she said, "and if you win too hard it looks dangerous, and if you show any struggle it looks weak." "Something like that." "Issei-kun," Irina said, with the patient certainty of someone who had thought about this more than she was letting on, "you are not actually managing a demonstration. You are introducing yourself. There is a difference." She picked at a thread on her uniform. "A demonstration is something you control completely. An introduction is honest. You show what you are, and the people watching decide what to make of it based on their own frameworks, and you do not control that part, and that is fine." He looked at her. "When did you get wise?" he asked. She looked deeply offended. "I have always been wise," she said, with considerable dignity. "You simply did not notice because you were busy being oblivious." He almost said something about the fact that she was here, that she had come all this way to serve as a witness, and had stayed and was sitting with him at midnight before the most important thing he had ever attempted, and he was grateful for that in a way that was real and specific and different from the general gratitude he felt toward the others. He did not say it. Not because it was not true, but because it did not need to be said yet. Some things needed to develop before they needed to be named. Try to sleep, Irina said, standing. You too, he said. She picked up her sword with one hand and patted his shoulder once with the other, a gesture that was completely natural and entirely her, and went inside. Issei stayed in the doorway a little longer. Above the garden, the stars were very clear. Tomorrow he would play a rating game and win it, and the world would have to find a new category for what he was. He was ready. Chapter 14: The Sovereign's First Move. The rating game arena assigned to the Zagan match was located in the neutral dimensional space maintained by the Rating Game Commission, a bureaucratic body so old and procedurally entrenched that it functioned essentially independently of any single faction's influence. The arena itself was a mid-tier construct, a walled urban simulation approximately 4 kilometers on a side, with varied terrain including open streets, a central elevated structure that served as a natural defensive position, and several underground sections that rewarded knowledge of the layout. Issei had memorized the layout. Zagan's peerage consisted of his queen, a devil named Marcosius who specialized in high-speed aerial combat, 2 bishops with complementary supportive and disruptive abilities, a rook who was a straightforward power fighter, and 3 pawns who were, based on the intelligence Zephyros had provided, competent but not exceptional. Issei entered the arena alone. This caused an immediate murmur among the spectators, who had expected him to have peerage members of his own. The sovereign claim structure technically allowed him to enter solo, which was the provision he was using, but no one had done it before, and the Rating Game Commission's commentator had to look up the relevant rule in a registry that had clearly not been consulted in a very long time. He did not enter alone because he lacked support. He entered alone because the statement he was making with this match required that the victory be unambiguous in its origin. Not a team win. A demonstration of individual will and precision. Drake was with him. That was enough. The game began with the standard signal. Issei stood in the opening position near the arena's southern gate and listened to the silence of the urban simulation around him, letting his awareness spread through the space the way Kuroka had been teaching him to extend senjutsu-based environmental sensing, not a full senjutsu technique. He was not there yet, but enough to feel the movement signatures of 8 devils dispersing from the northern gate. He moved. The first engagement was with one of the pawns, who had broken away from the group in an attempt to circle south and gather positional intelligence. Issei found him in an alley off the central boulevard, and the exchange was brief and precise. No full balance breaker. A controlled burst of boosted power channeled through a single strike that was calibrated to incapacitate without serious injury, which the Rating Game Commission sensors registered as a retirement. 1 down. He moved before the signature of the engagement could be fully processed by the other members of Zagan's peerage, not running but flowing, using the terrain the way he had studied it, keeping his own energy signature compressed and narrow so that the watchers on Zagan's side were working with partial information about where he was and what direction he was moving. The rook came at him through the central boulevard with the straightforward power approach that intelligence had predicted. This was the match's first real physical test, and Issei met it on a side street rather than the open boulevard, changing the geometry of the engagement so that the rook's size advantage became a liability rather than a force multiplier. 3 boosts. Targeted. The rook went down without ever getting a full swing. In the observation gallery, Issei could feel rather than see the quality of attention changing. The spectators were no longer watching a curiosity. They were watching something. The 2 bishops worked together, as the intelligence had noted they did, and finding them meant finding the team's anchor position, which was the elevated central structure. Issei did not attack the structure directly. He found the sidelines from it, identified the areas that were not covered, and moved through those areas with patience he had learned from 3 weeks of doing nothing but thinking clearly under pressure. He came at the bishops from below, through an underground section they had left unmonitored because standard peerage doctrine said the dangerous target would come from the most direct approach. He retired both of them in a single coordinated sequence that took less than 90 seconds. The second and third pawns withdrew when they realized the bishop anchor was gone, which was tactically correct but did not help them because Issei had already anticipated the withdrawal routes. That left Marcosius. The queen came at him from above with the aerial speed that the intelligence file had described as her primary advantage, And it was real. She was fast in a way that demanded respect, and the first exchange sent Issei through a wall and into a building's interior with enough force that plaster dust and brick fragments filled the air around him. He got up. Partner, Drake said, with quiet attention. I know, Issei said. I have her. He boosted once, carefully, not to match her speed but to match her altitude, because the aerial advantage only worked if he stayed on the ground. He came up through a building's ruined upper floor and met her on the same level, and in the close-quarters space where her aerial speed became difficult to deploy, the fight was different. She was strong and fast and technically excellent. She was also operating with the mental model of an opponent who could be outrun and outlasted, and that model became a liability when Issei was not running and not tiring. The retirement took 4 exchanges and left both of them with scrapes and 1 cracked rib on Issei's side that Asia would deal with later. Issei heard the commission's announcement of Marcosius's retirement, and stood in the rubble of the building and breathed carefully around the rib and waited. Zagan retired his king piece directly, which was his right and which was the right choice. The remaining pawns were not going to change the outcome. The game ended. The silence in the observation gallery lasted approximately 3 seconds before it became noise. Issei walked out of the arena's southern exit without hurrying, and his left hand was steady at his side, the boosted gear quiet and controlled, and the expression on his face was not triumph, but something more, contained the look of a person who has done exactly what they intended to do, and knows what comes next. Chapter 15 Victor's Right. The paperwork was handled by Zephyros, who had been in the gallery and who appeared at the arena exit approximately 40 seconds after Issei emerged, already producing documents from a briefcase that he seemed to carry everywhere as a natural extension of his person. Victor's Right claim, formal independent court establishment, sovereign seal application, and notification to the Mao Council, Zephyros said, arranging papers on a fold-out table he had apparently brought himself. Sign here, initial here, and press the sacred gear's seal here. Issei signed. He pressed the boosted gear to the seal space and felt Drake's acknowledgement move through the sacred gear like a current, formal and deliberate, a dragon choosing to be recorded. The sovereign seal creates your court's legal existence, Zephyros said, assembling the signed documents. As of this moment you are recognized under the old code as an independent devil entity with the right to hold pieces, establish territory, make treaties, and conduct raiding games in your own name. And Zagan has fulfilled his obligation and wishes you well, sincerely, I believe, because this has also established several market conditions that benefit him. Raynare appeared at his shoulder, which meant she had been in the gallery, which meant she had come without telling him. He did not say anything about this. He simply noted it. Asia was there too, having apparently arrived at some point during the later stages of the match, her healer's kit already out and her expression the specific combination of relief and focused practicality that it wore when someone she cared about needed medical attention. Sit down, she said, indicating a bench. C. Push by. I'm fine, he said. C. Push your energy signature says otherwise, she said, with quiet authority. Sit down, please. C. Push. He sat down. She began working, her twilight healing filling the cracked rib with the gentle warmth that he had grown used to but that still struck him, every time, as one of the most remarkable things he had ever experienced. The pain faded methodically, replaced by the clean absence that followed Asia's work. C. Push. You went in alone, she said, while she worked. C. Push. But needed to be alone. I know, she said. I just want to make sure you also know that going in alone by choice is different from not having people. C. Push. He looked at her. C. Push. I know the difference, he said. I have been learning it. C. Push. She nodded, satisfied, and finished with the rib. C. Push. Kuroka arrived last, from a direction that was not any of the gallery exits, which meant she had been watching from somewhere outside the official viewing structure. She looked at him and looked at the paperwork stack and looked at Zephyros and then looked at the boosted gear. C. Push. The seal is active, she said. I can feel it. C. Push. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. The old Senjutsu traditions talk about something like this, she said slowly, as though working out something she had been sitting with for a while. An anchor point. A person or a place that becomes genuinely foundational for the people around it, not through obligation but through resonance. She looked at him. You are becoming one. Issei did not know what to say to that. Irina, who had also been somewhere in the gallery, came around the corner at this moment, and stopped when she saw everyone assembled and said, loudly, that she had been looking for him for 10 minutes. Raynare looked at the ceiling. Asia laughed, which was a sound that consistently managed to make the space around it better. Kuroka's mouth curved slightly. And Issei, holding his new sovereign seal and sitting on a bench with a freshly healed rib while his broker filed the paperwork for his independent court, felt something settle into place that had been in motion since the night in the corridor. Not an ending. The first solid ground. Chapter 16. The Shadow Moves. Kokubile moved on a Tuesday. He moved in the way that things which had been patient for centuries moved, which was to say not gradually but suddenly, with the full force of everything held back finally released in a single decisive moment. He did not send an agent. He did not send a message. He came himself, with 3 of his most powerful subordinates, and he came in daylight, which was the choice of someone who had decided that subtlety no longer served his purpose. The warning came from Raynare. She had maintained a surveillance network of her own across Koa's approaches, built from her Grigori training and from the contacts she had been quietly re-establishing since her reconstruction, none of them official, all of them real. The alert reached her through a relay she had placed near the northern transit corridor, and it reached Issei through her 23 seconds later, which was fast enough. He called everyone to the garden in 90 seconds. Kuroka was already awake. Raynare was already armed. Asia had her healer's kit, and the expression of someone who had been in enough of these situations to skip past fear directly into focus. Irina had her sword drawn before she was fully through her bedroom door. Kokubile, Issei said. He is 6 minutes out and moving toward Koa's center. He knows where we are. He is coming here, but he is also broadcasting his presence openly, which means he wants this to be public. Why public? Irina asked. Because a public attack on a sovereign seal holder is a political event, Raynare said, her voice flat and operational. If he kills you here, in front of witnesses, it is an act of aggression against an entity recognized under devil law. It provokes a response from the malfaction that he can then escalate. He is still trying to start his war, Issei said. He has just decided to use me as the opening move rather than as the weapon. Then we do not let him use you, Kuroka said, and there was nothing lazy about her voice now. We fight him here, in our territory, on our terms, and we survive, and then xraynarex has to respond to a failed assassination of a sovereign seal holder, which is a very different political situation than a provoked war. Issei looked around at them. Raynare with her light lances already forming in her hands, the pale gold of them casting moving shadows on the garden wall. Kuroka with her senjutsu power rising around her like heat shimmer, her golden eyes fully open and fully awake. Asia standing between them with her healing arrays active and her expression steady. Irina with her holy sword in hand and her wings spread, the brilliant white of an angel who had decided exactly what she was fighting for. He felt it then, for the first time. The sovereign's amplification. It did not arrive with a dramatic announcement, or a visible surge. It arrived the way true things arrived, quietly and completely, as if it had always been there, and had simply been waiting for the correct conditions. It moved through the boosted gear like something the sacred gear itself recognized and had been holding in reserve, and it spread from his hand outward through the garden in a wave that was invisible to the eye but entirely legible to the soul. He felt Raynare's power sharpen. He felt Kuroka's senjutsu deepen. He felt Asia's healing arrays grow broader and more stable, and he felt Irina's holy power ring like a bell that had been given a better resonance chamber. Drake, inside the sacred gear, said nothing for a long moment. Then, very quietly, there it is. Issei exhaled. Everyone, he said. Something has just changed. Stay in formation and do not hold back. He felt their awareness of the change moving through the connection, felt each of them register the amplification in their own power and understand what it was, and felt something that was not quite surprise from any of them, as if some part of each person had known this was coming. 5 minutes later, Kokubile arrived above the house on the eastern hill with his black wings spread so wide they blocked out the sky and his power rolling off him in visible waves of dark energy that made the air shudder. He looked down at the 5 of them standing in the garden. He looked at the sovereign seal's light rising from the ground beneath Issei's feet. And something moved across his face that might have been the first version of surprise the ancient fallen angel had felt in a very long time. Sekirudai, Kokubile said, and his voice was low and vast, the voice of something that had been speaking for long enough that even the tone of it had weight. You have been busy. I have been building, Issei said. There is a difference. Kokubile looked at each of them in turn, reading them with the assessment of a battlefield strategist who had been reading opponents since before recorded history. He smiled. It was not the smile of a villain performing menace. It was the smile of someone who had come for a fight, and was pleased to find one that might actually be worth having. Good, Kokubile said, and descended. C.push gap / chapter 17 C.push chapter title chapter 17 The storm above C.push The three subordinates came first. C.push They were not Kokubile's equals, not in power or in centuries, but they were not ordinary either. They were fallen angels of the old generation, the ones who had been present for things that the current supernatural world only studied in records, and their power carried the specific quality of long experience, which was different from raw strength in ways that mattered. C.push Raynare took the first two. C.push This was not a plan Issei had made. It was a decision she made independently in the half-second window between Kokubile's descent beginning and the subordinates' breaking formation. She was already moving when they were still processing their initial dive. And she moved with the absolute focused precision of someone who had been trained by Grigori's operational arm and who had spent 6 months after her reconstruction quietly reviewing every technique she knew and identifying everything she had been doing wrong before. C.push The light lances she threw were not the standard Grigori issue that she had used in the past. They were sharper, more concentrated, channeled through the amplification that Issei's sovereign power had seeded in her abilities. The first subordinate caught 3 of them in a formation that should have deflected them and did not, because the amplification had sharpened them past the threshold of what that deflection technique was built for. He retired from the engagement, which in a real fight would have been a much worse word. C.push The second came at her from her flank and met Kuroka instead. C.push The Nekomata's senjutsu at full amplification was something none of the subordinates had been briefed on, which was an intelligence failure on Kokubile's part. And it showed. Kuroka wrapped the second subordinate in a senjutsu binding technique that operated on a level below standard energy detection, seeding into the opponent's own life force and using it against them, and the fight was over before it had fully begun. C.push Raynare engaged the third in the air above the garden. And this was the hardest of the 3 because the third subordinate was the most experienced, and had the instincts of someone who had survived millennia of conflict. He read Irina's attack angles correctly and initially and pressed her back across the sky in a sequence of exchanges that left light trails cutting through the afternoon air in intersecting arcs of white and dark gold. C.push Issei boosted Irina once, a targeted sovereign amplification pushed specifically toward her through their connection, not a general field expansion but a precise channeling. And he felt Draying's approval of the control required for that specificity. C.push Irina felt the amplification hit her like a second wind, and her counter-offensive changed completely. The third subordinate found himself suddenly facing holy sword pressure that had moved 2 categories above what it had been 30 seconds ago, and after 4 more exchanges he broke off the engagement entirely. C.push All of this took 40 seconds. C.push Kokubile landed in the garden and looked at his subordinates, and looked at the 5 people who had dealt with them, and looked at Issei. C.push Impressive, Kokubile said, and meant it. The amplification is real. I had considered the possibility, but I had assessed it as unlikely to manifest this early. He tilted his head. The girl's talent with the technique is unusual. The Nekomata is stronger than her file indicates, which suggests her file is deliberately misleading, which means she has been managing her apparent power level for years. He looked at Raynare. And you. C.push Raynare met his gaze without expression. C.push You were one of mine, Kokubile said. Indirectly. Twice. I am one of no one's, Raynare said. C.push Kokubile made a sound that acknowledged the point. C.push He turned to Issei. C.push You understand what I want, he said. Not the surface version. The real version. You want order restored, Issei said. In your understanding, Order means the three factions at each other's throats because that is what they were built to be. Yes. You are wrong, Issei said. Not about what they were built to be. About whether that is the correct thing to restore. Kokubile looked at him. Really looked at him, the way something very old looks at something unexpected, with the compound attention of someone trying to determine whether what they are seeing is real. You are 17 years old, Kokubile said. Yes, Issei said. And in 6 months I have been killed by a fallen angel, resurrected as a devil, betrayed by my peerage, and decided to build something that does not belong to any of the categories this world uses to understand power. He met Kokubile's gaze steadily. I am not going to be your war-starting device. I am not going to be your war-ending casualty either. I am going to be something else entirely, and I am going to spend as long as necessary making that clear to anyone who needs to hear it. Silence. Above them, the sky over Ko was split with the remnants of the air battle, light and dark energy fading in slow arcs. Remarkable, Kokubile said, very quietly. Not admiration, exactly. Something more complex. C.pushpen. Then he attacked. C.pushgap / chapter 18 C.push chapter title chapter 18 The weight of what he carries. C.push. What followed was not a clean fight. C.push. Clean fights were for raiding games and training grounds and stories told afterward. What happened in the garden of the house on the eastern hill was a fight in the original sense, meaning it was loud and damaging and moved in directions that no plan had anticipated. And the only thing that could be said for it with certainty was that it ended. C.push. Kokubile fought with the kind of power that came from 10,000 years of survival. And that power had a quality to it that was different from anything Issei had faced before. It was not simply strong. It was patient. It had seen everything, had outlasted everything, and carried in its attacks the specific confidence of something that had never once needed to wonder whether it would win. C.push. The first 3 exchanges between Kokubile and Issei established a clear fact: Issei could not match him in a direct trade. C.push. This was not a disaster. It was information. C.push. He stopped trying to match him. C.push. He fought laterally instead, using every principle Drake had spent the last 3 weeks embedding in him, not to overpower but to redirect. Not to absorb but to deflect. Not to confront the full force of what Kokubile brought but to find the specific moments in the gaps between attacks where the ancient fallen angel's certainty became a liability. When you have never had to doubt an outcome, you develop patterns. Patterns could be read. C.push. Raynare watched the first 5 exchanges and identified the pattern herself, calling it through the connection in a clipped operational shorthand: right shoulder drops before the vertical, 3-count gap after the light javelin, pivot direction predictable at distance below 20 meters. C.push. She had been a Grigori operative for decades. Reading fallen angel combat patterns was what she had been trained to do. C.push. Issei used the information. C.push. Kuroka came in on Kokubile's flank during the 6th exchange with a senjutsu technique that was specifically designed to interfere with the regenerative function that ancient beings used to sustain themselves in extended fights. It did not injure him in any conventional sense. It made the fight more expensive for him, seeding a persistent drain into the life force reservoir that an entity like Kokubile usually considered bottomless. C.push. Raynare created light barriers that compressed the combat space, taking away the aerial freedom that Kokubile's fighting style was built around. He broke through each of them, but breaking through cost time and energy. And time and energy in a fight that was becoming incrementally more expensive was a different equation than it had been at the start. C.push. Peja held the back line and healed the injuries that accumulated, working with a speed and precision that the amplification had elevated to something that should not have been possible from a single healer managing 5 combatants in real time. She was also doing something else, something Issei had not asked her to do and had not expected, which was maintaining a running quiet commentary through the connection about what she was observing from the back, angles and damage patterns and the specific moments when combatants were overextending. C.push. She was, he realized with a clarity that arrived in the middle of a fight like many true things did. Not simply a healer. She was an anchor. The fixed point that everyone else could operate from because she was there and steady. C.push. The fight lasted 22 minutes. C.push. In the end it was not a single decisive blow that ended it. It was the accumulation. Kokubile was ancient, and enormously powerful, and had been holding most of his full strength in reserve in the way that the very powerful always did, not wanting to waste the full expenditure on what he had initially assessed as a containable situation. By the time he recognized that the situation had been assessed incorrectly, the incremental drain of Kuroka's technique and the sustained pressure of Issei's redirectional fighting and the compressed space of Irina's barriers had moved the fight to a position where committing his full strength would also fully commit his vulnerability. He chose not to. This was not surrender. It was tactical restraint. It was the choice of someone who had survived 10,000 years by knowing when a fight had become something other than what it appeared to be when it started. He rose into the sky above the garden and looked down at them, and said nothing for a long moment. You are not a weapon, Kokubile said finally. And there was something in his voice that was not quite the admiration of one combatant for another but was in that neighborhood. You are not a war starter, and you are not a casualty. And you are not a piece on anyone's board. No, Issei said. What are you then? Something new, Issei said. Something that does not have a category yet. Kokubile looked at him for another long moment. Then at the garden. Then at the 5 people standing in it, battered and tired and entirely unbroken. I will remember this, he said. It was not a threat. It was a statement of fact from something that had been collecting facts for 10,000 years. The world will need to decide what to do about you. I know, Issei said. I am counting on it. Kokubile left. The garden was quiet. Raynare sat down on the ground immediately, because one of her light lance sequences had cost her more than she had budgeted. Kuroka stretched her arms above her head with a sound that was entirely cat. Asia was already moving through them with the healer's kit, her hands glowing, efficient and gentle. Irina's wings folded closed, and she looked at the sky where Kokubile had been, and then looked at Issei. What does it mean that he left? She asked. Will he come back? Eventually, Issei said. But not soon, and not like this. He is going to recalibrate. Figure out what we actually are before he tries again. That is still a problem. It is a postponed problem, he said. Which is different. Postponed gives us time. She nodded. She sheathed her sword with the precise practiced motion of someone who had grown up doing it. I am not leaving, she said, matter-of-factly. He looked at her. I have been authorized for extended diplomatic presence in Ko under the peace framework, she said, looking at something in the middle distance with the expression of someone reciting an official justification they had personally arranged. And the house is large enough. Raynare, from the ground, said that the house was barely large enough. Kuroka said she would build another room, and was completely serious about it. Asia said there was absolutely space and began calculating which room could be converted. Issei looked at all of them. At his sovereign court, assembled in a damaged garden at the end of a fight that none of them had run from. At the people who had chosen to be here without being managed toward it. The sovereign seal pulsed once beneath his feet, warm and steady. Drake said nothing. He did not need to. Above them, the sky over Ko was clearing, the last traces of the battle fading, and the afternoon was returning to something that looked like ordinary, except that it was not ordinary at all, because ordinary Ko did not contain a Hyoudou standing in a garden with a fallen angel former operative, a Nekomata stray, a reincarnated angel, and a healer who had chosen all of this with both eyes open. The world was going to need to find a category for them. They would give it time. End of Act 2.